Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
When I was a kid, my mom married some dickhead who basically cheated on her from day one and never even really moved in with us. He just left his kids at the house for her to watch while he ran around with his ex-wife and occasionally came home to argue with her. I don't know how old I was then, probably like 6 or 7. I remember I left a letter for Santa asking him to sign it if he was real, because I had been told by some punk at school that he wasn't. My mom told me when I asked that he wasn't, however I didn't want that to be so. I can't remember what I wrote and whether or not that note is still around, I don't know, but I left out cookies and whole milk. No esoteric raw milk for young me, unfortunately. The next morning after unwrapping presents, I had forgotten about my letter until like the next day. I had drawn a line and asked Santa to sign on that line. The day after Christmas, I remembered the letter and ran like Jesse Owens to the living room to check. There was a signature. Years later, I remember having seen it again. It wasn't in my mom's handwriting, my grandma's, and the pa's stepdad hadn't even been around for the entirety of December that year. To this day, I ask my mom about it, and I know when she's lying. She says she has no recollection of signing or getting anyone to sign anything. Today I am 24 years old and I will, without hesitation, tell anyone that I believe Santa is real 100%. He's real. I know it.
3 days before Christmas. Grandparents arrive. We all go out for dinner. Merry time had by all. 2 days before Christmas. Sister and I went out shopping for some last-minute gifts for my little brother. She teases me about not having a girlfriend for the holidays at the food court. Bump into some mutual friends of ours. Good time had by all. 'Twas the night before Christmas. Parents off work, I'm off work. Little brother challenges me to some Super Street Fighter 4 and such. Sister remains addicted to cut the rope. That night we all went out in the minivan to look at Christmas lights in the area. Merriment had by all. Christmas. Little brother plays elf and passes out gifts. Everyone tears into gifts, showing off what we all got. Got my mom a pendant she'd hinted for. Dad a new speaker system for his midlife crisis car, as we call it. Got a little bro a small stack of 360 games and my sis a iTunes card and a couple 3DS games she wanted. Had to ask the folks what the grandparents wanted, so I got them one of those Keurig coffee machines. Unwrapping is all done.
Anon, why didn't you unwrap your gifts?
Look around. What gifts, Mom? Conversation and merriment stops like a train wreck.
Anon, what do you mean what gifts?
Look around, puzzled, wondering if this is the beginning of a gag, or she turns to Dad.
Honey, you did remember to buy Anon his gifts, right?
What do you mean me? You were supposed to shop for Anon this year.
Slowly dawning horror.
Little Anon, what happened to the money we gave you to buy something for your brother?
I got myself a skateboard. Wanna see it?
Anon sis.
Mother, I told you I ran out of money. You were supposed to cover for me until I repaid you back, remember?
Turns to grandparents.
Grandma went to the bank to get some cash to put in an envelope for him.
No, dear, that's what you were going to do when you went to the store the other day for more stuffing.
It was.
Holy shit. I was. Forgotten. Grandparents start arguing. Parents start arguing. Little bro laughing about how Santa forgot about me. Sis won't even look in my direction, though her face is beet red. I sit there, stunned, for several minutes, listening to my parents and grandparents argue back and forth in between them. Mother alternates to scream at little bro while he keeps laughing. Sis just pulls her knees up and continues to pretend to ignore me. She keeps looking at me and away really fast. Eventually, I just leave the room so I don't have to listen to all this. Go to my room and start reading a book I'd been meaning to start. Lord of the Rings, if you must know. Anything to drown out the shouting and my own heartbroken thoughts. Eventually, noise drowns out. Leave my room in hopes that it's some really bad gag. Enter the living room. Conversation sputters when they see me, then hesitantly, awkwardly starts back up again. Look at Sis again. I've always been close to Sis, even if she's a bit of a spoiled brat as the only girl. She still refuses to hold eye contact, but she looks about as miserable as I feel. Go to the kitchen, get some water, go back to my book. Mother pops her head in after a few hours.
Anon, why don't you come out and socialize with us?
Kinda hard to do that when the conversation stops the second I walk into the room. Argument commences. Argument stops when I finally just ask, how did you guys just forget me? Mom states that we'll go out tomorrow to find something I want. Kinda not the point here, Mom. Mom gets all shamefaced and walks away. Give them a few more minutes before I leave my room as well. Conversation turns awkward when I enter the room again, stays awkward when they see me take a seat on the couch. Everyone turns away in turn when I look at them. Even little bro isn't teasing me anymore. Whatever mom shouted at him must have stuck. Rest of the day was awkward, dinner awkward. Go to bed. Not one single person said sorry. Not one single person spoke to me unless I spoke up in conversation first. Not one single person responded to direct attempts to make conversation with more than 5 syllables. Dick around on 4chan for a bit before falling asleep. Have weird-ass dreams, such as one where my father knocked up my best female friend and she gave him syphilis in turn. Day after Christmas. Grandparents left 3 days early. Bright and early. Parents went to work without saying bye. Sis out with her friends. Little bro out with his friends. No gag, no lie. I was forgotten. Dicking around on 4chan because I really don't want to be out and about with my friends right now.
I am a collector of vintage Christmas ornaments and have done so for over 30 years. The day after Thanksgiving, I received a telephone call from a local auctioneer who had just received a consignment that included several rare handmade ornaments. The next week, I attended the auction and was delighted after obtaining several of these fine pieces at very reasonable prices. One ornament, in particular, stood out from the rest. It was a porcelain figure of a St. Bernard dog, handcrafted in pre-World War II Poland. Each Christmas, I select my favorite ornaments from my collection to display on my tree. I was very proud of the recently obtained St. Bernard dog ornament and wanted to show it off to my friends and family. One morning last week, I noticed that the ornament had fallen from the tree and was laying on the carpet. The string that attached it to the tree branch was not torn, and I felt fortunate that it had not broken. I just placed it back on the tree. That evening, I was sitting in the living room reading a magazine when I started to hear a ringing sound coming from the tree. It was like the sound of a porcelain bell. The sound lasted for a few seconds, then suddenly stopped. About an hour later, the ringing sound started again, but this time it was a bit louder and lasted for almost a minute. I looked at the tree but could not tell where the sound was coming from. I just assumed it was coming from outside the house. That night, I was laying in bed asleep, around 11:45 p.m. when I thought I heard heavy footsteps coming down my upstairs hallways towards my bedroom. I got up, looked around the house, and rechecked the intruder alarm. I was in the kitchen checking the outside door when I heard footsteps rapidly going up the stairs to the second floor. I live alone, so I was very concerned. I called 911 just to be safe. The police looked around the property to make sure it was safe. I live in a small community where everyone knows everybody else's business, so anything out of the ordinary is common knowledge the next day. The police assured me that they would not make a report. They soon left and told me to call back if I noticed anything unusual. I thought that was an odd statement, but I appreciated their concern. I walked up the stairs and turned towards my bedroom. As soon as I got to the bedroom door, I noticed it. The St. Bernard ornament was on my nightstand. Now I was freaked out. I have never experienced any paranormal activity, though I love to read about these things. Now it was happening to me. I picked up the ornament, walked downstairs, and placed it back on the tree. I looked at it for a minute or two and then noticed that 2 other ornaments were missing. I looked on the carpet, but nothing was there. After looking around for several minutes, I decided to go back to bed and look again in the morning. The next morning, I woke up and walked downstairs. I entered the living room and immediately noticed that the St. Bernard ornament was missing from the tree, but the 2 ornaments that were missing the night before were back on the tree. I looked all over the house, but the ornament was gone. It has been almost a week and the St. Bernard ornament is still missing, but there has been no further activity since it disappeared. I cannot explain any of this. Are you familiar with this type of activity? I hesitate to speculate what is going on and really don't want anybody coming into my house to investigate.
I have a disturbing Christmas-related story that took place in a remote small town located on Mount Desert Island, Maine. My name is George and I have lived here all of my life. I hesitate to name the town since this story could carry unintended consequences for the residents. I know that the story is true because I was a witness to it. It started in early December 1960 when I was age 12. Each week, my mother and I would walk to the local supply store in order to stock up on whatever we needed at the time. We didn't have the car because my father used it for his work as a state employee. He was away from home for several days at a time. The walk wasn't too far, but it was a bit hard during the winter since we had heavy snow at times. The store was owned by a wiry old man named Big John Cornell. Big John was well known in the area since he was a sort of legend after he had saved the life of a girl in the 1930s who had been attacked by a rogue gray wolf. He would show the scars on his arms from the confrontation to the local kids when they would come into the store with their parents. Big John was also a storyteller, and I mean some real whopper tales, especially when it pertained to his personal history. On this particular day, I was admiring Big John's small Christmas tree with wooden ornaments that he claimed he carved himself. There were all sorts of animals, including bears, elephants, tigers, etc. There must have been 50 or so wooden ornaments. As I stood in amazement of the detail in these carvings, Big John walked up to me and sat down in a rocking chair beside the wood stove. He lit his small black pipe, sat back and rocked away while watching me examining the Christmas tree. After a minute or so, John asked me if I believed in Santa Claus. I was surprised by the question but assured him that I no longer believed in the legend. John looked away, smiled and said,
Well, that's good. I didn't want you to be disappointed this year.
I was confused by his statement. What did he mean? A few days later, my mother asked me to walk to the store for a few items she needed. My aunt had stopped over for a visit and my mother was busy with her, so I made the lone jaunt. This wasn't unusual since I was now old enough to do this on my own. When I reached the store, Big John was sitting in the rocking chair reading a magazine. He looked up and asked me if he could talk to me. I sat down on the small chair on the other side of the wood stove, anticipating one of Big John's tall tales. What he told me was more than I ever expected. Big John's demeanor started to change. Whatever he was going to tell me was probably more serious than one of his typical parables. He looked into my eyes and said,
Something unusual happened last Christmas Eve. I saw the dead body of Santa Claus.
Well, I'm not sure what my facial expression was, but I can tell you what I was thinking. This old man was 4 quarters short of $1. Again he said,
I really did see Santa Claus' dead body.
I'm thinking to myself, why is he telling me this? He started to explain what happened. Last Christmas Eve he was at home getting ready for the drive to his sister's house on Christmas Day. He then heard a huge crashing sound in the woods near the house. He looked out the bedroom window but couldn't see anything, so he decided to investigate. The snow was very deep all around the property and into the woods. It was a clear, cold night and the moonlight was bright. Big John held a camp lantern in front of him as he made his way through the pine forest. Then he saw something lying in the snow. As he got closer, he noticed a man with a blood-stained white beard and hair dressed in a tattered red-colored coat and pants. Big John knelt down to check the man's condition. It was obvious that he was dead. In fact, the body was terribly mangled, though there was little noticeable blood. The body looked as if it had been dead for a few days. Big John explained that he reported finding the body to the authorities, who soon retrieved the remains. He said that the police told him that they wanted to keep the death quiet until they determined the identification of the deceased. He agreed not to mention the incident. I asked Big John, why are you telling me? He smiled and said,
Because I have to tell someone.
He got up from his rocking chair, walked behind the counter and reached into a drawer. He walked back toward me and handed me a pair of wire frames without the lenses.
Take these. These belong to Santa Claus.
I placed the wire frames in my pocket and told Big John that I had to get going because it was getting late. I bought the items I came for and hurriedly left the store. My head was buzzing all the way home. For 2 days I wondered why Big John decided to tell me the story. I eventually determined that this was just another one of Big John's ruses. I placed the wire frames in a shoebox and pushed it deep into the recesses of my messy closet. On Christmas Eve, my mother came home after walking to the store. I was sitting at the table working on a new jigsaw puzzle. I heard her asking someone on the telephone if they knew why Big John's store was closed. By this time my father was home, so he decided to drive to Big John's house to make sure he was okay. After an hour or so my father returned and said that Big John wasn't home, but his car was in the driveway. He had also noticed smoke coming from the chimney, so the fireplace was still burning. He decided to call the local sheriff and make an inquiry. After several days no one had seen Big John. His relatives and friends were contacted, but no one had any information. The sheriff was finally convinced that something was wrong, so he entered the house. Nothing unusual was found, no clues as to Big John's whereabouts. The next logical place to look was the store. Here is where the story gets fuzzy. I had no knowledge of what the sheriff had found until my father told me a few years later. While searching the inside of the store, the sheriff and a deputy found a large mound of old rugs in the middle of the ground cellar floor. The deputy started to remove the rugs until he started to notice an unmistakable odor. Before he removed more rugs, the district coroner was called to the location. What they discovered was both unusual and confusing. There were skeletal remains of a human body with a tattered red coat and pants. Well, I'm sure my jaw noticeably dropped. I told my father the story Big John had told me. Eventually I told the same to the sheriff. I also retrieved the pair of wireframes and handed it over to the state police. Since that time I have not heard or seen anything further concerning this incident. I suppose there are various scenarios that could be created from the story, but I just wish I knew what happened to Big John.
I've had a weird time loop distortion of reality happen to me while driving. It was Christmas night 2016 and I was headed back home around 9 p.m. To get home, I have to take this back road through the countryside to get up into the foothills of the Sierras where I live. I had a strange feeling come over me, but I shrugged it off as just me being scared since I have had many UFO encounters in the past. The road was pretty desolate. I remember on the wide blind turn I passed an oncoming car, then continued on for about a mile and a half up towards the traffic light at the college. As soon as I climbed the slight hill up to the straightaway where the traffic light is in view, I instantly noticed that the light wasn't there like normal. Then, in an instant, I ended up back on the road right before the wide blind turned a mile back from where I had just already driven. This time no car passed by me as I went through the turn and the clock minutes never changed, just kept ticking forward. As far as I know, I experienced no missing time throughout the whole event. When I ended up back on the road where I had just driven all over again, I felt as if I was just thrown into the car. I felt strange and my body felt different, as if I had had an out-of-body experience, and my legs shook uncontrollably. I could barely operate the pedals. I was very scared because I've never had anything like that happen to me before. Especially on a desolate road at night. The only thing I can think is that I ended up in some temporary time loop or I was abducted with no missing time and they put me back on the road a mile and a half earlier, than me driving the same stretch of road twice. But I can't figure out why the traffic light wasn't there when it should have been, nor why it was the trigger to put me backwards on the road. The second time the light was there as normal when I drove back up the hill, but so far I have no clue why or how that happened. This occurred on Christmas night 2016 in Northern California.
When I was about 7 or 8, I heard somebody singing Christmas carols. It was Christmas Eve. He was singing Christmas carols rather badly, so I got up, looked out the window and down on the street. I looked down and the road was dark and I knew it was paved and the cement wall was missing. I thought, that's weird. And here comes this guy stumbling down the street in a Santa suit. He stumbles up the hill, like walking through where the rock wall was. He's stumbling along and there's this old well that's still there to this day and he falls down the well. And me, 7 or 8 years old, I go, Santa fell down the well. Santa fell down the well. So I ran outside, down the stairs. I was in a 2-story that was old, even when Vallejo was new. So, I looked out and the well was still built, just like it was the day before. The road is paved and the rock wall is there. Well, I go, maybe I just dreamt it or something. Now, I said, okay, that's fine. Go back upstairs and go to bed and, at about 4 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day, I wake up and here's this thing floating over my bed. It's the guy, in the Santa suit, floating over my bed. And he goes, your presents are here. And, as a 7 or 8-year-old kid, I go, presents? I go, that's great. I roll over to get my brother and I wake him up. I go, Santa said the presents are here. Santa said the presents are here. So we ran downstairs and all the presents were there. And I go, the presents are here. The presents are here. And we wake up our parents and we're screaming and hollering about the presents. My dad comes out and he says, what are you kids doing? It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I go, Santa said the presents are here. Santa said the presents are here. And he looks down at the floor and there's 3 extra presents that he doesn't know where they came from. My dad tells me to open the one marked for me and it's an old wooden, handmade train.
It was the Christmas season in 1958. My parents and I lived in a small home in eastern Tennessee. We survived on what little money my mother could make doing odd jobs for other people in the area. My father was wounded during the Korean War and he received a monthly pension from the government. I was 8 years old at the time. After school, I would work around the house and help care for my father. I knew that money was tight and figured there wouldn't be any gift giving that year, but we made the best with what we had. A few days before Christmas Day, I was lying in bed and started hearing noises coming from outside my window. It sounded like children playing and laughing. I got out of bed and looked out the window. I noticed several blue lights bobbing about in my mother's garden. I went and woke my mother. She got up and we walked out onto the porch. We both clearly witnessed the blue lights moving up and down above the garden. It was very cold, so we went back into the house and watched from my bedroom window. The lights were there for over an hour and continued moving about. We were very tired, so we both went back to sleep. In the morning, we were sitting at the table eating breakfast. My parents were discussing the blue lights. My father said that he heard of a similar occurrence when he was a boy. The deacon at his church commented to several of his congregation that he noticed blue lights outside the rectory one evening. His explanation was that these were angels watching over the church. The next few nights I watched for the lights, but they never returned. On Christmas Eve, a few family friends stopped by the house during the day to wish us happy holidays. My friend Larry came over also. We listened to the radio for most of the afternoon. Neither one of us had ever had a television in our homes. I mentioned that it would be nice to have one, but I knew that we could never afford it. I told Larry about the blue lights and the story that my father had told me. Larry said that his Uncle Joe told him the same story about the blue lights outside the church rectory, so I figured that must have actually happened. Larry also said that his Uncle Joe mentioned that there were little people with big heads and large eyes who lived in the mountains. I asked Larry if his Uncle Joe had ever seen these little people. Larry said that he didn't think so. That evening my parents and I were sitting in the front room when we heard what sounded like footsteps on the porch. My father went to investigate, but he didn't see anything unusual. I then told them what Larry's Uncle Joe had told him. My father just smiled and said that old Joe told a lot of good stories, though most were just not true. My father then said that he remembered a story that old Joe told him one day. My father said that old Joe told him that the little people of the mountain would bring gifts to folks they liked. He said that old Joe thought that the little people were really aliens because he had seen lights fly off the mountain at night. I prodded my father to tell me more, but he said old Joe told too many stories that were flat out lies. It was about 10 p.m., so I was sent off to bed since we were going to church on Christmas morning. I woke in the middle of the night to get a drink of water. I didn't notice the time, but I believe it was around 1 a.m. or so. I walked out of my room and into the hallway. I noticed that same giggling and laughing I had heard the night I witnessed the blue lights. The sound was coming from the front room. I slowly walked down the hallway and peered around the corner. There was nothing there, but I did see a square shape on the floor by the bookshelf. I turned on the room light. It was a brand new television set, a Motorola. I remember letting out a scream and hearing my mother running down the hallway. She saw me standing in front of the bookshelf, not knowing what was going on. Then she noticed the television. I can still remember the strange look on her face. She turned and ran back into her bedroom, yelling all the way. I could hear her asking about the television, while my father answered, "What television?" We sat in the front room just staring at the television, occasionally looking at each other. We never did figure out how it got there. I'd like to think it was the little people in the mountain. In fact, that's what old Joe told everybody who'd listen.
Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, December 1st, 2010 a.m. Several days after witnessing two low-flying objects over the area on two separate nights. One of the objects was described as huge, making a rumbling-like noise. It had a V-shaped tail with 2 rows of round and oblong windows and was black, gray, and silver in color. And after receiving a suspicious phone call from someone claiming to be a general from the Canadian Armed Forces, 2 strange men appeared at the door of the witness residence. They produced wallets, one black, one brown, containing photo ID that stated they were from the Canadian Air Defense. They asked to come inside. The witness extended his hand, but was ignored. Moving into the house took them through the kitchen area, but they stopped upon seeing the microwave. After some questioning, the witness lowered a portion of a counter and they carefully slid through the extra space. Sitting down, they produced a small silver-colored tape recorder and inserted a small disc, between a nickel and a quarter in size. On entering the house, one of the men had noticed an unusual walking stick in the hallway, to which he remarked that the head of the stick's carving, painted red, reminded him of primates back home. The two men were olive-skinned and appeared to have slanted eyes. Each wore glasses with thick rims. They wore gray suits with black shirts, one had a white tie, and the other was buttoned up to the neck. The one with the tie had a clip that contained a red stone that flickered. The other had a ruby ring surrounded with diamonds. His watch was square but without apparent hands, instead being encircled with buttons that periodically illuminated from white to green to mauve. The strap appeared to be molded into the skin and was a solid steel band. The belt on his pants was of metallic strips with a square buckle. Both had very large feet, estimated to be size 14. Each carried a briefcase that was heavy and cold. When sitting down, they never relaxed into their chairs but retained a stiff back the whole time. Not once during their stay in the house did they speak to each other. The witness' two cats were extremely agitated the whole time during the visitor's stay. Also, the owner's dog that lived upstairs barked during the whole episode. The men noticed that the witness was wearing a very unusual watch, and one of them touched his arm. The touch felt very cold and clammy. They questioned the witness about his sightings, and one of them appeared to have taken shorthand notes. When they questioned him, they looked into his eyes and seemed to pierce his brain. As they were leaving, they again carefully avoided the microwave. Outside in the yard, they spent about 30 minutes scouring the ground with a Geiger counter. As they rounded the corner of the house, the witness went from the kitchen to the bedroom, which gave him a clearer view of the driveway and the road. Despite the very short period of time it took him to achieve this, the two men were not in sight, nor was a car leaving, or no car door could be heard slamming. They had vanished. Later, they discovered that on the windowsill, only 6 inches behind where one of the men had been sitting, was a Windex bottle and was partially melted as if heat had been applied to it. Alongside was a cassette warped in a similar manner. The witness suffered from a severe migraine-type headache after the two men left. His eyes also felt gritty and watery, and his face now appeared sunburned. He also suffered from strange dreams, one that was of lying prone on a table in a round room with a bright light above him, then sensing being touched. 2 days later, while going outside his house, the witness saw the same two men he had seen before in the driveway. Both were dressed in white coveralls. One was carrying a Geiger counter, the other a 12 to 16 inches parabolic dish in his hand, pointing to the sky, plus earphones and a microphone that was attached. He appeared to be searching the sky. The wires all led into a black box at his waist. At one point, he had what looked like a camera, although not video, aimed at a tree over which the UFO had been originally seen. During the time they were together, neither was seen speaking to each other, nor was any car seen which they might have arrived in. In December, a few days after Christmas, a man appeared at the door of the witness. He stated that he had come to see his unusual watch. He stated that his name was Mr. Smith and showed some ID. He wore a dark charcoal suit, white shirt, and black tie. He also wore a black fedora. His feet were very large, size 13 or 14, like the previous visitors. His shoes were black and shiny, with no signs of dirt on them at all. He was about 4 feet 8 inches to 5 feet tall, very thin, and very pale-skinned with very long fingers. He also wore black wraparound glasses with silver frames. The witness extended his hand but was ignored again. Upon entering the house, the visitor commented upon the carved walking stick in the hallway. He also asked the witness to turn the microwave off before he walked in front of it. Sitting down at the kitchen table, he produced a small silver tape recorder, claiming it could record up to 80 hours or more. Using a pick-like tool from his breast pocket, he examined the witness watch. He opened a black briefcase, removed some paper, a silver pencil with a red top, and a pen-like flashlight that emitted a mauve, pencil-thin beam, which scanned the interior of the watch with. He took a small digital-type camera, and with it he took several pictures of the watch. During the whole of his visit, he spoke very little, and his speech seemed slurred. Again, the cats were agitated during the stranger's visit. He again expressed interest in the watch, and the witness asked for $500 for it, but he replied that he had to check with his colleagues. The stranger also expressed interest in a computer, saying that it had very minimal power. The stranger departed without saying goodbye. The witness went immediately to the window but could not see any sign of the visitor or any car in the vicinity. He had simply vanished. The plastic hair blower nozzle was found melted, and a ruler in a drawer close to where the visitor had been sitting was bent into a slight S-curve. Again, the witness suffered from a severe headache and an eruptive nosebleed. In early January 2001, two peculiar strangers again visited the witness to a previous UFO encounter. These two were different from the others. They were at least 6 feet tall, very bony, with head, hands, and feet out of proportion to the rest of the body. They wore gray suits that seemed to be oily, had black ties and hats plus wraparound sunglasses that they never took off. When questioned about the glasses, they remarked that they could see perfectly well. Their ears stood out from their heads and their skin was pale white, whereas their fingernails were gray in color. They never removed the hats during their visit, and throughout the whole time only one of them spoke. When asked for ID, they displayed silver cases that contained a photo of an unusual symbol, plus their names in small print. Upon entering the kitchen, they asked the witness to please unplug the microwave. They also told him to turn the computer off. The two Persian cats were going crazy, dashing around the room and trying to get out of the window, which was closed. Each man carried a briefcase with an inverted L-shaped handle. The man that did all the talking asked to see the witness' unusual watch. He then removed from his briefcase 4 small containers. Each had a different colored top. Opening 2, he proceeded to pour the contents over the watch. He told the concerned witness that no harm would come to the watch. He was given $250 for the watch and told that they would give him the rest later. He told them that he was moving soon, to which they replied, "We know, don't worry, we can find you if we want to." They soon departed without the common courtesies, staring blankly at the witness as he extended his hand. Once again the witness hurried to the bedroom window only to find, as before, no sign of either man departing, nor could any vehicle be heard leaving. After the visit, the witness felt drained, had a severe headache that lasted for 2 days, and a rash on his arms, face, and chest.
Be me. 6 years old. Come from an extremely poor family and live in a post-communist European shithole. Christmas of 1998. Instead of a stash of presents, I got news about my parents dying in a car crash. Go to sleep after crying my eyes out. Wake up in the morning. There's a single box of chocolates there. Get freaked out but eat it anyway. Fast forward to today. Going through old shit stashed in the attic while looking for something. Find a weird wooden box. A ton of family photos. Spend an hour or 2 looking at them. Find this one. The date written on the back is December 24th, 1998. What the actual fuck did I just find? Who took the goddamn photo? I was alone at home on that day.
On a scale of 1 to 10, what's the surest you've ever been at any one moment that something absolutely sinister was looking straight at you? I'd rate my experience earlier tonight at about an 8. I was driving home from my parents' house around 10 p.m. They only live about 10 minutes drive from me, but what a difference 10 minutes makes. They are out in the country, no streetlights, it's Michigan in the middle of winter, and I'd made the terrific decision to take a relatively unkept road home. The same road where I collided with a deer not 2 months ago, instantly vaporizing my Christmas fund. It's deer central out there. Well, I was headed down this road at about half the speed limit, eyes peeled for some of the 4-legged white-tailed terrors, and my eyes were starting to get strained by the headlights of an oncoming vehicle. It was at least a half-mile away, but the high beams were on. I guessed it was a truck, though I didn't want to look too closely and then be blinded to some furry racking machine sauntering out in front of me, so I kept my eyes off that side of the road as much as I dared. As I got closer, I realized I was right, it was a pickup truck. But it wasn't heading toward me, it was parked on the shoulder. And the emergency lights were blinking. I slowed down even more, waiting to see the telltale signs of a deer collision: imploded grille, cracked windshield, missing side mirror, and, obviously, a deer corpse. Once I was alongside the pickup, I still hadn't seen any damage. Now that I was out of the light's glare, I could see that the truck was pulling a horse trailer. The trailer must have been wired in, because the red lights on the back were blinking on and off in time with the emergency lights on the truck. I rolled down my window to talk to whoever was in the cab, but once I looked closer, I realized the truck was empty. "Hello?" I called. No answer. Then I heard the scraping and thumping. It sounded like someone slamming an upside-down bowl onto a surface repeatedly. It was coming from behind the trailer. I looked out my windshield and saw a loop of rough rope making up part of a knot around a handle on the back of the trailer. I couldn't see the rest of the rope, but the knot seemed to be sliding up and down the handle a bit. I inched forward in my car, peering around the corner of the trailer. Sudden movement startled me. Then I realized what an idiot I was. The rope led to a harness fastened to a horse. The large, brown creature was scraping and stomping its hooves on the ground, standing close to the ditch, stretching its rope across the back of the trailer. As I pulled up further, it glanced at me, snorted, and went back to stomping. Thinking I was probably irritating it, and knowing there were no other cars for miles, I switched off my headlights. It kept stomping. I looked at the ground around its hooves. The snow was tossed up, and in some spots, the horse had chipped off bits of the dirt shoulder. He'd been out here a while. "Hello," I called again, fully expecting a response from the dark field on the other side of the ditch. Nothing. I looked at the horse again. Steam shot from its nostrils. Then I looked back at its hooves and the ground around them. I'm not a Boy Scout, but fresh snow makes it fairly easy to piece simple stories together. In the brief, flashing intervals of dim, red light afforded me by the trailer, I was easily able to make out boot prints alongside the trailer, obviously coming from the cab. They turned and led along the back of the trailer, then into the ditch, past the bubble of red light. Then there were the same boot prints coming up from the ditch, accompanied by hoof prints. Presumably this guy's horse had gotten out of his barn or pasture nearby, and he was out here to retrieve it. That was my Columbo moment. Then there was the whole area in between the horse and the side of the trailer closest to me. I could see the boot prints, but they weren't in a straight line. They seemed to be all over the place, pointing everywhere, like a person jumping around, or hopping from one foot to the next. And mixed in with them were other prints. The new prints looked a bit like the inside of a peace sign, a Y with an extra line between the forked lines, about twice their length. There was no rayal sole or pad, but each toe, if you could call it that, was thick, at least a couple inches wide. And at the end of each toe print, including the long, rear protrusion, the handle of the fork, I suppose, the snow seemed to have another flaw in it. Not an imprint, really. More like a slit. Like from a claw. These prints were as mixed up as the boot prints were, but tended to stay closer to the road. Whatever made them, the guy wearing the boots would have to get past it to get back to the cab. Out from that mess of prints, both human and, I guess, animal will do, erupted a straight line of boot prints, with long strides, heading back along the road, away from the truck and trailer, past the edge of the red light. They continued into the darkness that knew would be uninterrupted until the first streetlight a mile away. The other prints were mixed in with these ones, weaving in and out of the same line. In other words, following. Their strides were at least as long as the boot man's. I stole one more look at the horse, still clearly agitated, and at the prints right behind the trailer. Now obviously snow being white, and the trailer's pulsing lights being red, all the snow in the range of the lights was going to be red. But I know it wasn't my imagination that some patches, here and there, were a different shade of red than the rest. And with the dim light and the horse's dark fur, it was hard to be sure, but thought a few long lines were glistening down the animal's side. I like to think I'm not a stupid man. I saw no benefit in staying here to play detective. I decided to distance myself from the horse, trailer, truck and prints. I nipped my lights on and started rolling away. The horse never stopped staring at me. I swear it had the closest thing I've ever seen on an animal to the expression of a homeless man who hasn't gotten a penny all day. But as I pulled forward, I just wasn't able to take my eyes off the footprints and whatever prints on the side of the road. About 10 feet past where the red light would have ended, there was another scuffle, both sets of prints mashed together, definitely a couple spots of dark pink snow, and then just the boot prints, continuing their journey. But off to one side, they'd left behind a much larger imprint, roughly human-sized. There were shapes on both sides of the body. They were wide and somewhat wrinkled, like the imprint of a jacket a child would leave after laying in the snow. They fanned out from the main body, leaving drag marks like something unfurling. They were also ribbed. I admit I was only viewing this in passing, but I swear I know what I saw. It's hard to describe exactly. But thinking back, I'd say that comparing that shape to a snow angel would seem wrong in more ways than one. kept moving, picking up just a bit of speed, but I was still going fairly slowly so my tires wouldn't burn out on the snow and ice. I could see the three-toed prints moving from the larger shape back to the chase, just for a few feet, and then they just ended. The boot prints carried on for another 40 feet or so. Then they ended, too. At this point, I had to stop. I don't mean that I really decided that I wanted to. It's like my brain just needed to verify that I was seeing this right. 2 sets of prints, one human, one not, both just ending. No sign of a change of course, or a dive to the ground, or anything. Pure untouched snow on all sides. Well, not totally undisturbed. I think something in my brain was just misfiring at that point, trying to make it all fit, and so I looked back once at the trailer and truck, highlighted in a blinking red aura. I could see the horse still watching me. And then in the road ahead of the truck, something shifted. It was the truck's headlights. They bounced. The truck's taillights also bounced, just a slight dip toward the ground, then back up, like a brief pressure on the suspension. The trailer shifted just a touch. Now the horse wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the black space above the truck and trailer, the spot on the roof of the trailer that no light could reach. And it was straining against its rope harder than I've ever seen anything fight in my life. My tires burned out briefly before they found traction. So that was my 8 moment. I really lost count of how many times on the way home I nearly slid into a ditch. I went sideways once. But I always kept control, using some combination of luck and sheer force of will to not get stranded on the road tonight. Now I'm in my driveway. And I'm wishing my garage door was working. Because right now I'm having my 10 moment. The porch light is illuminating a portion of the roof on one wing of my house. All around me the freshly fallen snow is undisturbed. But in that one little corner of the roof, I can just make out a pair of imprints marring the scene. I probably don't have to describe them to you. My front door is maybe 30 feet away. 30 feet. I'm wondering if I should try sleeping in the car tonight.
Used to go visit Grandpa up outside of Bozeman in the winters. Grandpa is this tiny little, frail old man, but he's hardy as kick. He used to take us snowshoeing up in the mountains, and carry most of the gear in this sled he pulled behind him. It was kicking cold up there, your snot would be frozen before it left your nose. The times he did convince us to go out, we ended up staying in ice caves that Grandpa had carved into snowbanks earlier in the winter. It got dark really early, and of course no campfires because ice and snow everywhere. One year we're out there camping with Grandpa, and he's really on edge the whole trip. Don't ask him why, because we are stupid kids and don't think it matters. Random outbursts, yelling at us for not tying a knot right. Yelling at us for not keeping up with his insane pace. Stops hiking at about 2 p.m. Nightfall isn't for another 3.5 hours. Me and brother exchange WTF looks with each other. Look around for his ice cave, there isn't one. Hey Grandpa, where are we camping? Grandpa is nowhere to be found. Can't find his footprints, which is strange because snowshoes leave enormous footprints that you can't miss. Backtrack and refollow the trail to where we were earlier. Footprints just kicking end right where me and my brother were when Grandpa told us to stop for the day. After a lot of deliberation, we decide to head back, following our tracks back to the main road, where we will somehow flag down a car and get help to find our Grandpa. We hike about an hour back the way we came. Suddenly hear voice.
Where the hell have you kids been?
It's Grandpa and he's pissed. Says he was hiking along and all next time he turned around, we weren't there. Says our footprints just ended about 100 paces back from wherever he was when he realized we were gone. We tell him something similar happened to us, and we just got back from 2 miles ahead of us on the trail. Suddenly, he goes into wild animal hyper-alert mode. Stops talking. Eyes scanning forest around us, head pivoting side to side, trying to see everywhere at once, get freaked out and brother starts crying. Grandpa won't respond when we ask him what's wrong, quietly muttering incoherently to himself. After what seems like forever, Grandpa starts moving again. Simply says,
"Follow me."
And we do. Too scared to argue, but he's going in a third direction, i.e. not where we came from and not where we were originally headed. We are all hiking close together, literally stepping on each other's feet, can't hold hands because of ski poles, but we would have if we could have. Eventually emerge in a clearing. I recognize it as a lake, but you'd never know it in the winter when everything is frozen solid. We get out on the ice and walk all the way to the middle of the lake before we stop. Grandpa tells us to get out our parkas, as we're going to be staying a while. Ask him what's happening. Doesn't answer. He gets out binoculars and starts to scan the shoreline. This is a pretty huge lake, so without binoculars, neither me nor my brother could really see anything besides little distant trees on the shore. At this point, Grandpa puts the binoculars down, unpacks a fairly large caliber revolver and holster, and puts it on his hip. He then picks the binoculars up and points them in the same direction he was looking a minute ago. Me and my brother both look in that direction. I can barely see something moving around. No, a couple things, all of various sizes. They're all hanging on the bank, though none of them leave the thick brush surrounding the lake, or venture onto the ice. After a few minutes, Grandpa silently hands me the binoculars. When I look at the movement on the shore, I almost shit my pants. There are 3 animals. 2 are what I can only assume are wolves. Maybe coyotes, but I don't think so. The bodies are just too long, almost snake-like. The third animal is some sort of all-white thing standing on 2 legs. The more I look at it, the stranger it seems. At first I took it to be a bear, just standing there on its hind legs. Then it starts walking, pacing around really, and the legs are just too long and slender to be a bear's. I sit down on the ice, lean up against my backpack, and get a more steady grip on the binoculars. Slowly realize that whatever it is has the approximate build of a human, but the head is clearly not a human head, some sort of animal I can't place. Ask Grandpa what the hell I'm looking at. Brother snatches binoculars away, and when he sees it, he labels it bearman and wants to take a few shots at it. Grandpa says Indians used to dress up in animal furs in order to blend in with the animals they were hunting. Slightly stop shitting myself. It's just an Indian in a bearskin. And he has 2 dogs that look like wolves. And they're following us, but are afraid of ice. Start shitting my pants all over again as I realize that this is about 100 times weirder than a real bearman. It's starting to get dark, and we're still out there on the ice. We're all watching the Indian / bearman / whatever the fuck it is and his dogs / wolves slowly wandering along the coastline, clearly avoiding the ice, but clearly trying to get out onto it somehow. Every once in a while, they'll change direction, as though they were pacing back and forth. In the time I have the binoculars, I see the thing, and his dogs / wolves motionless and staring directly at us many times. No one breaks the silence for a long time. When it gets too dark to see anything on the shore, Grandpa relaxes, puts down the binoculars, and actually starts to make camp as though nothing had happened. Of course, we don't have a tent, but we do have sleeping bags, and bivy bags to keep the blowing snow off of them, and the wind off our faces. Me and my brother look at him like he's crazy.
"We're going to sleep out here."
I say something like, "What about that guy? Holy shit, he's right over there." Doesn't matter, we spend the long night in that exact spot. Next morning, we can't locate any animals or bearmen after 45 minutes of scanning the trees around the lake. Grandpa deems it safe enough to head back by now, and since he knows these woods so well, we take a different route back to the main road than we took to get there. After 1 mile, he's doubling back, staring at mountain tops and measuring angles between them with his arms, and I'm convinced he's lost. In the next moment, several things happen all at once. With no warning, a huge moose gallops out of seemingly thin air, and almost crushes my brother, managing to push him on the ground. Grandpa collapses for an unknown reason. The 3 of us form a triangle, and in the middle is a slender person covered in all white fur, like a polar bear, and with a bear head, or maybe a mask, but it looked pretty damn lifelike. The 2 wolves, I'm sure they're wolves now, are circling at a distance, or rather, one is circling, I don't see the other. Bearman lets loose a scream like you imagine Bigfoot might make when caught in a bear trap. Grandpa half sits up, points revolver, and fires off 3 shots at the thing in rapid succession. Huge puff of snow like a silent explosion, and can't see anything for a few seconds. Now a second moose goes hurtling through, and after it's gone, and the snow has settled down, the bearman is gone too. No traces of blood to be found. Can still see the one wolf, pretty far away, but it's still circling. We proceed to book it out of the woods, taking the shortest and most direct route off the mountain. Think that Grandpa isn't really sure about where he's going, but nobody gives a shit, we have to keep moving. Still think I see the wolf out at the edge of my vision, several hundred feet out through the trees, or maybe it's both of them. We eventually do get back to Grandpa's car. Turns out he did know where he was going. It's been covered in fresh snowfall since we left it there. There's 10-inch paw prints all the fuck over it and around it. Nope. We clean off the snow and see that there are dents in the hood, like hail fell on it, but they're right under where the paw prints were. Nope.tar.gz.biz.nope. On the drive home, we all swear to never speak of this to Grandma or to my mom. Have to swerve out of the way of a huge roadkill. Almost drive off the road. Stop just in time. The thing in the road is a huge mound of fur with no distinct animal-like forms. No head, no legs, no tail. Blood everywhere. Looks like a giant skin thrown over a giant mound of flesh. It moves. Nope. Grandpa peels the fuck out, drives home 30 miles per hour over the speed limit, and we never look back.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.